All right, this Hangout on Air is live. This is LangCamp Hangout number 4? Are we up to 4? All right, so we're up to number 4 now, and we're talking about, excuse me, we're talking about rubrics and feedback tonight. And with us, we have a variety of homies from LangChat. The keys to a successful video is having headphones and the mute button when you don't want your face to pop up is the main one. So I'm going to call people and have you introduce yourselves and hear a little bit about what you want to know or do with rubrics and feedback tonight. So Sharon is the first one that I see. So Sharon, oh, I'm Laura Sexton. Hi. And I constantly change my rubrics, so I really need some help. So Sharon, hi.
Hi. Hi, everybody. My name is Sharon Tebow. I am a World Languages Coordinator from the School District of Waukesha, which is located just west of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And this topic is of huge interest to me, primarily because our teachers just went through some revision of their Level 1 curriculum. And with that, before we could do anything, we needed to design common learning target rubrics, and we successfully accomplished that throughout the spring after defining what our competencies are. So I'm looking to find out, I've shared my document of what our rubrics are, and I'm looking for some feedback from you all and looking to learn a little bit about what kind of rubrics you're currently using and how you design them.
Cool. So we know Sharon has some rubrics to share, and I know Sarah Elizabeth is eager to share a musical interest one she's been working on. And with that in mind, there are a couple of ways to share, and some of us were talking about it before we started. In the Google Chat, if you mouse over on the left of your screen, you could see a little blue thing. That's a Google Chat, and you could just post a link. But for everybody who's following along with the video, the nicest thing you could do might be to do the screen share, which is the little green icon on your left. I tried sharing my screen, and it just was like an infinite series of Hangouts, and it was really kind of creepy. So, but there's a green button that says screen share, so if you could pull yours up. Me, I'm not going to be able to pull much up because my poor little computer, it hurts its brain to pull stuff up. But if you guys have something to share, please do. Screen share would be good. Also, if you could also do it in the chat, that would be great so that we could do that. And of course, if you have resources, we would love to see them in the LangCamp community so that people can refer back to them later. So we'll be looking for those, Sharon. All right, next person I see in line is Sarah Elizabeth. Will you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. I am Sarah Elizabeth Cottrell, and I'm the blogger behind MissQuintus.com. And I put out a rubric in 2011 that is very similar to the JCPS rubric, but added some things that I felt like I needed to have. And it's been one of my most requested resources, but after scoring hundreds of assessments with it over the past 4 years, I feel like I have discovered a whole lot of bugs in it that I wanted to fix. And so I have spent the last month or so completely overhauling the rubric and designing a new one and getting feedback from a whole lot of really smart people and trying to improve it, and I'm excited to see what feedback I can get from everyone tonight.
Uh-oh. Sarah Elizabeth froze, but we will give her feedback. That would be good. So the next person I see in line is Ms. Mara. You have to, there we go.
Okay. I'm Myra Johnson, and I'm a World Language Instructional Specialist from Duval County, Jacksonville, Florida. And I'm wild about rubrics, but I know I have a lot to learn. And I've been out of the classroom for 2 years, but I always want to be a great resource for my teachers that I help to guide. And I've sat down with several of them and helped them create rubrics when needed, but we're moving so much more into proficiency-based grading, and I want to learn more about that, about making sure my rubrics are based on proficiency, because we have a lot of teachers who will put in, things in their rubric that really have nothing to do with how much the students know or can do.
Absolutely.
So, okay.
And I hope you'll tune in on Monday, Myra, because it looks like our topic is going to be focus on proficiency for that one.
Wonderful.
Too. So that sounds like everybody's trying to make that shift, and that's very encouraging. Okay. So we'll see what we can do for Myra. And the next I see Ms. Melissa.
Hi, can you guys hear me? This is my first one. Yeah, I'm good. Okay, my name's Melissa. I'm a third year Spanish teacher in the Chicagoland area, suburbs. This past year, we just implemented our new level 1 curriculum, and we're going to go ahead with level 2 this year. And rubrics and feedback is a big topic of discussion in our PLC meetings. So far, we've been using pieces of the actual rubrics, and we're looking to find better ways to give more concrete feedback that's helpful for the students rather than just giving them, a 2, 2.5, 3, etc. So if anybody has any pointers on that, I would love to hear them.
So when you say the ACTFL rubrics, which specific ones are you talking about? Is it
criteria? Yeah, I think so, where the criteria is like word recognition, main idea detection, guessing meaning from context. That's the interpretive rubric, but so we have the 3 different modes of communication.
Okay. Yeah, I've been like siphoning through ACTFL, and I'm like looking at their proficiency guidelines, looking at their can-dos and all, and like trying to put everything together. And I remember briefly seeing the rubrics, so that might be something to bring up. And again, if you would like to take a look at the actual rubrics and see what we could do with those, if you will just screen share with the little green thing on the left, when we get to that point, that'd be great. All right, next I see Madame Cécile.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cécile Lenné. I teach French in Cincinnati, Ohio, middle school and high school. So I teach all the way from 7th grade French 1 to AP. And about 4 years ago, our French AP exam was overhauled and now resembles the Spanish AP exam. And that prompted me to start really looking at those AP rubrics and going backwards. How can I get my students, by the time they get to AP, to digest those rubrics? And so we did a major effort to design rubrics starting from AP all the way back down to level 1, 7th grade. And then 2-3 years ago, I met this book, IPAs, Integrated Performance Assessments. Fell in love with it. Also a set of rubrics, which I think it was Melissa who talked about the actual rubrics. They're in there. So again, prompted a redesign. I feel like you, Laura and Sarah Elizabeth, like it's a moving target. I don't think there is the perfect rubric. And what I'm discovering now is I'm focusing a lot more on novice rubrics because they tend to be too technical and they're not student friendly. And the students make a lot of progress when they're novice. They go from nothing to wow at the end of novice. It's like, woo, they know so much. So how do you evolve the rubrics to follow their progress without having that moving target? So those are all of the questions that we have to work with. So.
Excellent questions. And the last person I see is Senor Barbara.
Hola, I'm Barb Clauser, and I teach in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I've been teaching levels 4 and 5, and we actually have an AP level even after that one. And I've been working with that AP teacher, was at the AP conference last year, and fell in love with this whole idea of putting everything to themes. And we are working backwards from AP all the way down, and we have language starting in 6th grade middle school all the way up through 12th grade that the kids have the opportunity. They must take it in middle school, and they have the opportunity to choose when they get to high school to continue on or not. And we are looking at incorporating rubrics of some sort more towards the proficiency side of things. But we have a very demanding school district in terms of, like, your grade is keeping my child out of Harvard sort of thing. And we want to be able to justify everything, not only to administration, but to parents and to kids, and try to work within the grading system that we're forced to use, but also show the kids how they're progressing. So we kind of have a lot of different things going on, and I'm just interested to see what other people are using. I'm also the World Language Coordinator for the high school, so I want to take things back to my colleagues and be able to share out as well.
Okay, so it sounds like we are all agreed on one thing, and that is proficiency. So we want to, shall we start there with like what goes on a proficiency-based rubric, maybe? You're gonna have to unmute to answer me.
Gotta have
That sounds good.
from the student's perspective. um, the targets in I can statements and can do statements from the student's perspective, and then you have to have a place to actually tell them what proficiency they're showing in the performance. And so there needs to be a place that says, novice low, novice mid, and so on.
All right, so we want to organize it probably by the different proficiency levels. And before we get caught up with this, I know that we're probably going to be evaluating performances, so a lot of people have a lot of confusion with that, but we would still assign proficiency levels, right? So,
right, because you're not telling them you are this proficiency, and that's the critical distinction that ACTFL's been trying to get us to make. Because when throwing around the language of, oh, it's a proficiency assessment, it's not a proficiency assessment. And that's why they've changed the language to performance toward proficiency. And some of the feedback I got back on my rubric, someone said, well, if you're defining the context, then is it fair for you to tell them this particular area on the rubric? And I said, yes, that's why it's called a proficiency assessment. Because I'm not saying you are a novice mid. I'm not qualified to do that based on the performance you just gave me. I have to have a much more in-depth oral sample, finding your floor and your ceiling and all of that stuff that I'm not certified to do. But I can tell you what kind of language you are showing in the performance that you just gave.
Okay. So should we amend it to say we are agreed on a performance-based rubric then, maybe? We're using the proficiency levels? See a couple nods.
Yeah, we're in the classroom, so we assess performance. Even if the ultimate objective is proficiency, as you said, we do that through the performance that they're showing us in the classroom. So I think the rubrics need to be performance rubrics, even if we're shooting for proficiency. That doesn't mean they're grammar-based or, how many words can you memorize? It's not about that, but they're still performance-based.
Okay, so performance of proficiency type skills, perhaps? Okay, so do you guys think, now I know that Sarah Elizabeth on hers has, and on the JCPS ones, they have a continuum of the different levels. So like for Spanish 1, maybe it would be like novice mid, novice high, intermediate low. Myself, I tend to start with novice low just so they feel like they're starting somewhere, and since we already have it split up into 3 6-week periods, then everybody can be like, oh yes, I have definitely accomplished something and I have mastered novice low. Or is that beyond proficiency performance-based thinking?
I kicked novice low off my rubric, and I don't know how people are going to feel about that. I was looking, one of the things that I told the teachers at Camp Musicuentos, showing that my old rubric and the JCPS rubric with the nice highlighting on the targets, where it was like highlight the novice high, highlight the intermediate low, highlight the intermediate mid, as a way to visualize that this is where the targets are. Just looking at it told me that half the rubric was irrelevant to my students. And I know that that's not true, but that's the message that it was sending. And so I decided that I don't intend to use it until I am expecting novice mid language. And so I needed more space. Frankly, the JCPS rubric is just tiny print and absolutely packed full. So I needed more space, and I got more space by deciding, you know what, novice low is not a target for me. And if I have a student performing after the semester, because mine will break at the semester, if I have a student performing at the end of a semester at novice low, then I'm going to want them to redo that performance, because that's not a target for what we're doing. So I kicked novice low off.
Are you talking in terms of a year-long course or a semester-long course? Are we talking about
It's a year-long course. Okay. This is an assessment after the semester.
Okay, so like mine are semester-long courses, so getting them to retest at the end of the semester would be very tricky. But so mine's like divided up into 6 weeks, so perhaps my rubrics would look different, because I would need to see where they were at the end of the first 6 weeks, or should I just say, if you're not to novice mid yet, then you're not on here, and that would be novice low, since you turned it in. What do you think?
I don't know. If you're going to do a performance assessment, one of the things I was asking myself was, at what level should I do a performance assessment? And so I've been listening a lot to the the question and mulling over the question for a few months now about if the research says that, especially at early levels, students need lots and lots of input to develop proficiency and don't need to be forced with output, then how reasonable is it for us to push a performance assessment at that very low level and expect them to do anything with it? And so I think that I am on the verge of choosing not to ask students to do a performance assessment until I can reasonably expect novice mid from all of them.
What do you guys think? Volunteer
That's
victim.
an interesting challenge, I think. There's a part of me that agrees with what you just said, and then there's a part of me that thinks that there's always a little output. It cannot all just be about interpretive. At some point, there has to be some output. So I just give you a brief example. Within the first few months of 7th grade, we look at filling out driver's license, immigration forms, and then we also learn, my name is, and some of the basics. And then I give them a performance assessment where they're helping their family to move to Canada. So the first thing they have to do is fill out the immigration papers. And then the second thing is they have to answer the immigration officer's questions, which are basic. What's your address? What's your age? What's your nationality? Which are very basic questions. And I don't ask them. I bring a French native speaker, and he's the immigration officer. And then and that's it. I mean, the interpretive part is understanding the immigration form from Canada. The output is just my name is, this is where I live, and then the written output is filling out the form. So it's a tiny output, but it's still,
right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I am definitely not one of those teachers that is like, don't ever ask for output, and you can't ever ask output. I think, as far as using the performance assessment rubric, I think I'm going to wait. But the filling out forms and asking them to even to converse with one another in the class as practice and all that formative stuff, and then even something about what you're talking about sounds exactly like what I would do in my classroom.
Yeah, but I do have a rubric for that assessment. It's very simple. It's, are you comprehensible? The output is, are you comprehensible? It's a yes or no kind of rubric. It's not very sophisticated, but it is a rubric and it is feedback. So do you understand the question, and are you comprehensible in your answer? And that's the beginning of the feedback.
And I agree with that too. With the novice low, like there's so little is asked of them at the novice low level for the output, like single words, parroted words, that I feel like, and since I have to have 2 tests each 6 weeks, then like I need to have some kind of performance assessment to show yes they are meeting this level. They are able to at least parrot the words. And so I've done simple, almost yes no kind of things. I've done sometimes or consistently. And if they can't do sometimes or consistently, I don't even mark it. But like I've got the sometimes on there to show that they're working towards it. And I've been doing that with the actual can-do rubrics, but I'm not really happy with that. So I'm hoping for a little bit more feedback on what they should be doing sometimes or always, even at the novice low level, and how I can make that more proficiency aligned even for their performances.
Those are really good points. So maybe I need to think more about what kind of a checklist proficiency-based rubric would look like for novice low, and then keep my very complicated, I mean, it's not complicated if you unpack it, but it's definitely elaborate rubric where it's at, which is mid, high, and intermediate low.
One thing I like to do, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
One thing I like to do when Sarah Elizabeth gets her rubric figured out is rip it off and turn it into a 4L rubrics checklist, so that I could have like a novice low one, a novice mid one, and a novice high one. Because I try and like make each 6 weeks a different level, at least for like Spanish 1 and Spanish 2, and so like that's their target, and that's where they should get to by then. But I'm gonna need simpler language before I can do that.
Bethany's first comment was, when are you gonna put intermediate mid on it?
Oh my gosh.
I was just going to say, don't you feel like each time you introduce a new topic, at the beginning of the chapter, you start all over at novice low because you're teaching words, and then you start putting it in context, and you hope by the end of the chapter they've made it to sentences. And I mean, I'm talking like Spanish 1 or level 1. You know, when you're at that point where you're just teaching the basic greetings and that sort of thing, they're in sentences, you know, within the first week, but not that they're proficient, but, you know, they're already in sentences. And then you start a new topic and you have to teach the words first, and then they move into sentences, and then maybe they move into paragraphs. So I feel like we're kind of up and down on the, I don't know, when you're planning lessons, you know, you're writing in the little benchmarks, and I feel like kind of we're up and down.
I think that could absolutely be the case if if you're letting the textbook dictate what sentences it should be saying. But if you got, say, your first 6 weeks, because that's what I know, you have your first 6 weeks and they've got their greetings down, great, they've got some sentences. They should have stuff like soy and s in there too, right? So they should be able to take their new vocabulary and make little bitty sentences still.
True.
So they're not starting from scratch. So,
that's true.
Oh,
that's true.
I saw a rubric pop up. Melissa, you got something?
No, I was just, as you guys were talking about these, I pulled up the can-do statements and was looking at the novice low, interpersonal communication, benchmarks, and can-do, and just looking at how little it is. And then once you jump into novice mid, there are so many more benchmarks. And so it's just, I was looking at what you can expect from each proficiency level.
How do you feel about skipping the novice low? Do you feel like that would be a useful thing to do, since we don't want to produce novice low speakers? What do you think, Melissa?
I'm not sure, because as of right now, we don't have that on our rubrics. We haven't been giving students their performance level. It wouldn't be proficiency, right? Performance. So I'm not totally sure. I'm just listening on this part.
Okay. Oh, I saw another rubric pop up. Where'd it go?
Would it be helpful to look at I don't know, either Sharon's rubric or Sarah Elizabeth's rubrics and have something concrete that we can all talk about? Or I don't know.
Who volunteers as tribute?
I volunteered 2 tributes already.
I'm all about talking through it and seeing what you guys think.
Okay, so screen share us if you would. And you have to do the talking now.
All right, can you see that? Can you all see that? Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
If we talk, it'll go away.
Right. Okay. So you can see it. So one thing is at the top. It says performance for proficiency, and that was the important distinction. And it's the World Language Assessment rubric. And as I talk through it, then you may be able to see the fingerprints of several people. And when I put this out on the blog on Miss Quintus in the first week of August, I will definitely give shout outs to all the people whose wonderful rubrics contributed to this, and all of the wonderful people too who are giving me great feedback to change stuff. Even just several parts of it got a major overhaul today. So I divided my sections into 4 categories, and the first one is message type, and then message depth, message control, and cultural awareness. And then you can see across the board that there is the category here on the left, and then like a subcategory. And then you have a description of what the performance looks like at novice mid, novice high, and intermediate low. And then on the right side, this was a box that we wanted. I think that came from a great suggestion from a Camp Miss Quintus person, was that what do you do if it's not applicable to the assessment that you're doing, or that there's not enough evidence in the assessment for me to be able to make a call on that? And so I included kind of a checkbox that is not applicable or insufficient evidence in the performance sample, and that's one of the things that I really wanted from problems with my old rubric. Within the message type, the question is what language do I use? And then I have 3 categories here: structure, depth of vocabulary, and context. And the structure is a lot of the regular ACTFL language that you're used to seeing, but I noticed a word coming up in the proficiency descriptions on ACTFL that I hadn't seen in a rubric before, and I thought that is a word that I need to include because that is such a great description of what these students can start to do, and I just haven't had a place to tell them that that's what they're doing, and that was this word recombine, because it's the opposite of chunking. And so the novice mid is still chunking memorized stuff and just kind of throwing out memorized chunks of language, even when they're sentences like the other person was talking about. Even when they're sentences, it's still memorized sentences like "How are you?" or the "How old are you?" Those kind of memorized sentences. But when they're novice high, then they can begin to recombine those parts, so they can disassemble them and then recombine them into new sentences, and they can start to make simple requests, and then in the intermediate low actually can recombine, and that's why intermediate low can look so much messier than novice mid, because novice mid can look really great when they're just throwing out memorized chunks. And the intermediate low can look very messy because they're being so creative, recombining the parts of language. And I needed a place to be able to say that. In the depth of vocabulary, this is an AP issue where students are, I was constantly telling my students, okay, you're using the word morir, to die, and now let's see if we can get some depth of vocabulary in your 4th year and start using fallecer and perecer, which are kind of the equivalents of like to pass away or to perish, and so much deeper vocabulary. And so I wanted a place to be able to tell them what kind of variety they were using. And I really liked this sentence, the way that it was put. With novice high, they're using some variety, but it's supported by memorized language. And then the intermediate low is showing variety by personalizing high-frequency expressions. And there was a great example of this in a sample that Laura gave me, and I cannot remember what it is at the moment. I'll have to find it before I put this out on the blog so that I can show what I mean by personalizing high-frequency expressions. So turning things around to, it was putting isimo on something. She wanted to say that something was malo, but that it was really, really bad, and so she added the suffix to it to express her degree of it. And it wasn't the adjective malo. It was just it may not have even worked in the place where she had put it, but she picked some adjective and then thrown isimo on the end of it to force it to be expanded in meaning. And so that's what an example would be of personalizing high frequency expression.
So Elizabeth,
yeah.
I have a question real quick. It's going to be hard to do while I'm talking and see it. And I think I'm trying to look at it with student eyes since this is from their point of view. And I can hear my students asking what adequate vocabulary means and like what counts as adequate and what wouldn't, and like how they're supposed to know when they are up to that level or when they're beyond it.
Yeah, that's a common question that I'm getting about a lot of the words. Like what's a variety and what does adequate mean? Several words like that, and straightforward. The difference between straightforward and uncomplicated, and these are adjectives that ACTFL uses in their performance descriptors, and so I copied them, and I think I can understand some of what it means. But I really, when I present it on the blog, I think I might even do like a screencast of going through it and giving examples of what each one means. And I guess with novice high, an example of using like adequate vocabulary with some variety supported by memorized language, that a novice mid might be able to tell you that they like a lot of colors, but then a novice high would be able to tell you which of the colors they like more than the others. So but the novice mid can't do it because they don't have all the words for the colors that they like. And so they just stop short of saying that, and then the novice high will keep going because they do have the words for the colors they like. Does that make sense?
I wonder if there might be a clearer way to phrase that within the rubric, though, because a screencast would definitely be helpful in going through examples for sure, but I don't know if that's going to communicate what it needs to whom it needs to, and I wonder if there's another way to express all of that in something brief and simple. And if I knew how, I would have done it by now. Which
yeah,
I don't
yeah. Please let me know if you can come up with something, because in coming up with the question of the question was asked, what are you talking about between a straightforward, it's this very next one, the context. So novice mid can function in well-practiced context that they've practiced a lot. And then a novice high can function with basic involvement in uncomplicated familiar contexts. And an intermediate low can function with straightforward involvement in familiar contexts. And these are actful words, and so we were talking through it at Camp Quintus, and I think we came up with a really good example of, so like a novice mid can tell a store owner, they can go into the store and say, I want a shirt in this particular color, maybe. And I mean, they could even communicate it by saying shirt color and like the particular color, like shirt red. And they could communicate that that's what they wanted, a red shirt. Well, then if the personnel there comes back and says, we don't have that color, but would you like a different color? Well, then a novice mid breaks down because all of a sudden there's a little bit of complication in it. It's still very basic because all you have to do is understand the question or understand that they don't have the color. Would you like a different color? Yes, I would like a different color. Well, then what if the store personnel comes back and says, no, what if you really want, no, I don't want another color. I really want red. I've got to have the red shirt. And the store owner comes back and says, okay, we're getting a shipment of the red shirts in on Thursday. Well, it's still familiar language. It's just, coming back with another a day of the week, and you need to respond by saying, okay, I'll see you on Thursday. But all of an additional layer of complication has been introduced. So I don't think it's possible to communicate that level of detail until in a rubric that isn't 17 pages long, right?
I really like the place for the evidence that shows up, because my administration is always looking, okay, what's your evidence? How can you back that up?
Oh, yeah.
Maybe if it's not included on the rubric as far as what does adequate mean or what does varied mean, maybe there's like a key for the teacher who's going to use it, or something to show the students as maybe a separate piece of it. Because
that's a good idea.
I would really like to be able, because I think I can see being able to use this for many different types of assessments, and but I can also see the need for newer teachers coming into the district or outside people coming in to observe or whatever, for them questioning that, and the need to be able to be more clear. Like, I think it's very clear to those of us that do language instruction and are more familiar with ACTFL and working this whole thing of working towards proficiency. But I think, as somebody pointed out earlier, it is like a moving target, and anything to make it like so we norm ourselves and we're all looking at things the same way would be an awesome tool to have.
Okay, that's a really good idea, including like almost a frequently asked questions document or a guide to it on the side. That might be with some concrete examples. That would be good. So the second category, message depth, is something where I really did not have any place to put this on the JCPS rubric. I didn't have any place to communicate this, and this is a big AP. This is what AP did to me, this section right here. And my question here is, how do I support my communication? And here I'm starting to get into that language is not just the language that I'm putting together, but it's the message behind it as well. And my big thing here, and I'll throw this out there, is that I don't do separate interpretive performance assessments. I do interpretive assessments as formative activities all the way through the school year, but I don't do summative interpretive assessments. what I do is I give them an interpretive source or two. I try to get at least one print source and at least one audio source that are intended to inform their presentational task. And that comes directly from the AP exam. So you're looking at an article, you're looking at a graph, and this is an AP task, and you're listening to an audio source. And then based on those three sources, you have to use the information that you've gleaned plus your background knowledge in order to respond to a writing prompt. And I thought, that's such a life skill, because life is communicating the things that I've learned in the past. And how do I get that down into novice and intermediate level? So what I ended up putting on there was the content support. I can sometimes support my responses with examples from my limited memorized vocabulary. And then on novice, high, and intermediate low, I started asking them to bring in some prior knowledge. And that's just an area for me to be able to tell them, hey, you mentioned in your conversation this thing that you learned, I know you looked at in like September. And so kudos to you. Props for bringing in prior knowledge and mentioning it in your message. And then the second half of that category is communication strategies, where I have an area to inform them on how they sustain communication, whether or not they can keep it going by asking questions, using transition words, showing some organization, and beginning to use circumlocution in intermediate low. Then down under message control, this was in a box called minor focus on the old rubric. And on the point of the grammar part of it was on how well I can be, on how accurate I can be without patterns of error that interfere with communication. I thought, if my patterns of error interfere with communication, that doesn't feel like a very minor focus to me anymore. And so I wanted to get rid of that whole major focus, minor focus dichotomy altogether, and I needed a place where I could tell them what their structural control was looking like, but in the context of proficiency language. So it's really all about, and here's another place where I would have to unpack the words adequate, and it's about being comprehensible, that these issues of accuracy are not preventing communication. So the second part of there is comprehensibility, and it talks about how often what you're doing is preventing communication and what strategies you're using to overcome that. So I really like the actual descriptions of, like, a novice high can clarify by using gestures and repeating. And I thought, I know exactly what they're talking about. Like, I can see my students at novice high doing that. Why wasn't that anywhere in my rubric? And then in intermediate low, that they clarify themselves by rephrasing and self-correcting. And I thought, yes, I know exactly what that looks like. And then I added cultural awareness at the bottom because I didn't have anywhere to do anything with cultural awareness on the other one, and I put a box on a great recommendation there, that what evidence am I seeing of their cultural awareness in their production. And I just put up a very detailed blog post with examples on what evidence of cultural awareness is. And then real quick, I wanted to, oh, sorry, go ahead. I'm trying to move through it quick because I don't want to commandeer the whole hour, but go ahead and interrupt me.
Well, we've got a lot of stuff to work with here, so I want to be sure that you're getting the feedback and that we are able to process what we've got there too. So before we get to the final piece, I just like to see what other people think. And real quickly, I want to say that the adequate thing might be able to be solved in that for the last one with just like comprehensible, and that might be a little bit clearer for that part. But that was just the one thing that I noticed. I want to be sure before we move to another page that everybody has been able to process it and can contribute what they think about that. Can you use this? Does this have something you need? What do you think?
The audience of this rubric is mainly teachers, right?
Yes.
Yeah. We when we started doing our rubrics here, we used a lot of the actual language, and then when we put it in front of the students, it took so much time to educate them. And some of the words, they're actually they're loaded. When you said limited to a student, when you really have to explain that limited is fine at that level, but all I'm trying to say is this language is very good for us, for teachers, but if we go into student self-assessments, we can't use those. And so are you also working on making a student-friendly version of this that your students would be able to self-assess with, or are you working on educating your students to understand this language? Which way are you going?
No, this rubric, I want to create a rubric to use the way I did with my other rubric, which was it's one rubric that I pick up for every performance assessment I do. I'm not trying to find a separate rubric for everything, and that it's a rubric that communicates to me and to my students. And I used very similar language to this, and the JCPS rubric uses very similar language as well. And I tried to change a lot of the words in order to try to make them not so much jargon, but be able to communicate to the students what they would be. So my intention is for the students to read this. I use it to score it. So I'm going to be the one actually circling on this, and you'll see on the next page what the student's response is. And so I'm going to be the one circling the boxes on this to tell them what language I think they're showing in the performance, but I want them to be able to read it and compare it and be able to look from one column to the next to see where they've improved and where they're headed. And I didn't, by educating my students on what all of this looked like, because they would ask me, what does it mean to extend the depth of my vocabulary? And so we would talk about what it meant to show depth of vocabulary. And we had very few conversations like that, but the ones that we had seemed to take care of the problem of the students not knowing where we were going or what we were doing with this. And in contrast, they seemed to feel empowered by being able to actually describe what kind of language they were able to use and to know what they needed to do in order to move up to the next proficiency level.
Sarah Elizabeth, if you don't mind, I would like to work on taking like one column at a time and turn them into 4 all rubrics, so the checklist kind of things with this sometimes and the always, because mine, I do like to have mine. So like this is what we're aiming for. Did you hit it like with their portfolios? Sure. And
so what you mean is to take like the novice mid column and then put it on a novice
so,
mid rubric. Okay.
Right. So I'd have a novice mid rubric, and then it would be sometimes always for like one of the things. And while I'm trying to do that, I got my wheels turning too, trying to think of any way that I could make it more student friendly, because I do also want to do more with the rubrics so that they can give themselves and each other feedback on these things. So do I have license to change some wording and still?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just put Los Cuentos on it somewhere.
That is the plan.
Yeah, and if you come up with better ways to replace words like what she was talking about with limited, let me know. And sometimes I look at things like that and I'm like, you know, what's the balance between encouraging them by what they can do and also being honest that novice mid can't accomplish a whole lot, and they know it. I mean, they know that novice mid can't accomplish a whole lot, and so I don't know. I'm not sure where to go with that, and it's a question I'm always asking myself. But some of the words like circumlocution, circumlocution is something I focus on with my students and intend to teach them how to do within the first 6 weeks of the program, and using the word circumlocution. So I can totally understand another teacher who doesn't teach explicit circumlocution and it doesn't teach what the word means. Would definitely want to change that.
No, I agree with you. I think the names of the strategies, they have to know them from very early on. Those are not, to me, this is not technical jargon at all. But some of the, like I said, some of the vocabulary like adequate and limited, this can feel more technical.
Right. Okay. So I'll work on that and see where I can go. And you can always email me if something hits you at 2 in the morning and you're like, I know what she can do with that word limited or adequate. So, okay, second page. This is primarily for the student. And the first place I want to show is on the right side, and so maybe I should actually switch these sides. The content goals. This is something that I needed so badly in my other rubric. This is probably the thing I hated the most about my rubric. This whole back page is all the stuff I hated the most about my other rubric. And I loved my other rubric, but I hated this part of it. And one of them was that, okay, it was great that I was telling them what kind of language they were using, what kind of proficiency they were showing in their performance, but what if they didn't do what I actually asked them to do? And this was a huge HP requirement. You can show all the great language you want in your essay, but if you don't cite a single one of the sources that they told you to cite, then you will not score very well. You just won't. And so I primarily scoring Spanish 3 and AP assessments, I didn't have a place to tell them, you didn't do what I asked you to do, which was to cite all 3 of the sources, and that was a really important thing. And so I was trying to figure out how to bring that out of the minor focus where it was in the other rubric, and Thomas Sauer helped me decide to make it a whole separate grade. And so then I thought, well, what if the students identify at the beginning of the grading period or whatever it is that I'm going to use this at the end of, and they're the ones who actually fill in those blanks. So they can't get to the assessment and tell me, oh, I didn't know that I was supposed to, and examples would be express disagreement, suggest an alternative, you know, those functions that I need to know that they know how to do. And I need them to show it so I can tell them, you know, you have to incorporate the interpretive source in what you're saying. You have to ask some questions, and then you didn't ask any questions. Well, you wrote down, I can ask someone a question about their family. And so I want them to fill that out themselves at the beginning so that they know what they're supposed to be accomplishing. And then when I score it, I stole this, I think this was from Colleen, I'm not sure, it might be from Amy Leonard. The strong evidence, weak evidence, no evidence on the evidence of skill strength. So if I can disagree with you, then the strong evidence might be a very clear disagreement, and then a weak evidence might just be a no answer, and then a no evidence would be no disagreement at all. And then I can give them feedback underneath that.
I think this would work nicely with what Cecile was talking about with the like I can fill out an immigration form, or I can answer basic questions about myself and family with the immigration officer, like, because that kind of thing is not tied in directly with the rubric, but it clarifies what their task is going to be. I think that would be useful.
Yeah. And then on the left side, you have the place to actually put what language they're showing. And I want them to fill out the top as well. On this performance, I am expected to show language with evidence of blank proficiency, so that they are actually writing in the blank which proficiency they're expected to show in their performance. And the Camp Mesicuentos teachers gave me the great suggestion of this ladder, or a staircase. And so the person's walking up the staircase, and this was another thing that bothered me about my old assessment rubric, was that I had novice mid, novice high, and intermediate low, but then I didn't have any way to tell them, well, what if, so I have 4 categories. What if 3 categories are novice high and one of them is novice mid? Well, then which one is it? Is it like a really good novice high? I mean, is it really good novice mid? Or is it kind of a lower novice high? And I didn't have anywhere to put that. So now this is very easily quantifiable for me, and I'll illustrate it in my blog post and or screencast, that a student who has, for example, 3 categories in novice high and 1 in novice mid would be a novice high minus, because novice highs are allowed to drop back into novice mid. And so then occasionally, and so then they would look at the minus, and I can tell them, if it's down at the minus, then check which category was was falling back into novice mid, and that's what you need to work on. And so I feel like this gives me a very clear way for them to see exactly which areas they're falling back or reaching forward into the next proficiency level, and so they can pick those and really really focus on them. And then they circle before, or they circle down there. So I do the staircase, and then the box below it, they're the ones who actually tell me whether or not they're approaching expectations, meeting expectations, or exceeding expectations. So they look at what I marked, and then they look at what they were supposed to do, and they mark what they were, where they are in regards to the expectations. I don't let students go below approaching expectations, and so they have to redo it, and then I put a place for a date for them to redo that, and then some boxes for a box for teacher feedback. And the last thing was a great addition suggested by someone, and based on Colleen Lee Hayes' rubric, on a box just for the student to reflect on their performance. What do I think went right or wrong, and what do I want to do differently? So there it is. I'm sorry it took so long.
So, guys, do we have our solution? Do we have the rubric that we've been waiting for? What do you think? I see some Linguafolio components. I've done some stuff with Linguafolio. I abandoned those rubrics that I made based on that because they were not student-friendly, and my kids are like, what does this even mean all the time? The actual has been more friendly than that. We haven't had anything in the Q&A, though we've got 6 viewers.
Can you clarify one more time why you don't have an interpretive communication rubric? You said that you use as more. I understand the AP task of having different sources and using it to produce something, but what about the actual interpretive communication of critical reading or critical viewing? Or can you elaborate just a little bit more why you don't have a rubric on that? Why you don't feel the need to have one?
Sure. I don't know if my video is not working or what, but there we go. Yeah, so I started, the AP task made me start questioning what we actually use interpretive skills in life for, and I don't, that's a question I'm always asking myself in designing curriculum and designing assessments, designing tasks, designing everything. I ask myself, what is the actual life skill that's represented here? And so, for example, in trying to practice past tense, my practicing past tense always comes in the context of narrating life, because I thought, what's the life skill that's represented in speaking in the past? Well, it's that students are always talking about the plot of the movie that they saw last week, or did you see what so-and-so did at the cafeteria table? And so that's just an example of the question I asked myself, what's the life skill represented here? So I was asking myself, what's the life skill represented in interpretive tasks? And I do formative and interpretive practice all the time. I use Edmodo a lot, and so my students will work on an article and answer some questions about it on Edmodo. We have a big file that a lot of Spanish teachers are collaborating on for commercials, where they listen and do some listening tasks with the commercial and then answer some questions and compare their own life to it. But in the performance assessment, I decided that I really liked the way the AP essay did it, where they asked them to integrate what they had seen into some production. And I thought, that's what we actually do in life. So tomorrow we're having a Lang chat on the book Make It Stick. It's our summer break Lang book thing. And so I'm taking what I interpreted from the book and using it in a life skill to chat about it with people. And so I thought, that's what I want to incorporate in my assessments. And so in my performance assessments, they all look like an AP task with the essay, only trickled down into novice skills, where the interpretive source is a novice source, and the task that they're actually asked to do is a novice task, but they're asked to incorporate that source into it.
One thing I've been trying to do is turn into a whole other subject entirely, is the standards-based grading, and like splitting it up kind of evenly among the communication skills. And so I feel like that would be kind of difficult with this rubric. So I wonder if, I'm trying to figure out how I would apply this, and then maybe I would just use the Apple rubrics to fill in for the interpretive part if I needed to do that, or something to show something similar. But there's actually a lot of things in there that could be adapted from production to input, I think, like using memorized language, the familiar context and all that. So I think it probably could be adapted to that purpose as well. What do you guys think? You gonna use this rubric? You gonna go back to GCPS, Fairfax, Ohio?
I liked the Ohio documents and incorporated a lot of the language that I was seeing in them in there.
Yeah, I think Ohio has done a pretty good job with the rubric, so I know I'll be working with those, but I really appreciate you sharing that, because it's interesting to see how separate efforts actually end up almost in the same place. I really like your second page, and I really like that you integrated the student voice in there, because that was kind of my concern when I first looked at the first one. It was so teacher focused, but I really like that second page a lot. I think that's probably what's bringing a ton of value to the students.
Good. I will see what I can do to work on that first one. I saw a comment about the. I do still want to emphasize how much interpretive work I do have students do, and that this is as a summative performance assessment. In my summative performance assessments, which might happen about twice a year, I don't include a separate interpretive task.
I just like the fact that this is something that I could pick up if I wanted to and use it for just about any type of activity or function that the kids are doing in class without having to recreate something brand new again. So I think it's very adaptable, so I think it looks great. My concern, and this might be for later when we're talking about proficiency in the next Hangout, is how do we make this work then with regards to assigning points and grades in the system that we might have to deal with as far as our school districts are concerned, because that's all going to come back to it, because the kids are so grade focused, and I know that's a systematic thing, but like, how do we work within that and still show them this?
This is another place where this rubric actually helped me too. Was and Megan and Kara on the Creative Language Class blog do a good explanation, and I think I may have just copied their explanation onto my blog of how we do this, where it's like meeting expectations is a B, and then exceeding expectations is an A, and approaching expectations is a C, and you're not allowed to get below that, so you have to redo it. But on theirs, if I'm not mistaken, they said that they did theirs where meeting expectations as a B was just an 85, and they just entered it as an 85. So you have the B being 80 to 89, and so they just enter it as an 85. Well, what if they were doing 3 at novice mid, and they were expected to do novice mid, so they're meeting expectations, but they had 1 in novice high? Well, shouldn't that grade be somewhere like between the 85 and the 90? And so by putting the plus and minuses on there, that also I felt like gave me some room to inch those numbers up and down and have students actually know why they were inched up and down, because they were reaching into one category of the next proficiency level. So I got a couple extra points for that.
Right. I think that's great.
On the other hand, do it a little bit more holistically. Like, I use the Apple rubrics, and I haven't, of course, used Sarah Elizabeth's brand new rubric yet.
Yeah.
But so at the end of the first 6 weeks, then I expect them to be at novice mid. So, or I can't even remember. Well, at the end of the second 6 weeks, the expectation is that they're at least a novice mid for Spanish 2. And then so novice low, I give them a 9 out of 10 for that. Give them 8 out of 10 if they're at novice low, 10 out of 10 if they're at novice high already. Then the next 6 weeks, I bump it up, and then it's a 10 out of 10 for intermediate low, and then a 9 out of 10 for novice high, 8 out of 10 for mid, 7 out of 10 for novice low. And I make it a lot easier on myself because I just want them to have the general category of where they are. So
you almost have like a sliding scale as they're progressing for them to still get the credit, but hey, you should be progressing more than you maybe are.
And I think the kids really like that. They felt like it was fair and that they were able to not fall behind. Like, they were worried about that at the beginning, like, oh, I'm going to stay in novice mid forever, I'm going to fail at the end. It's like, well, if you're keeping up with progress, it'll be okay. And I'm looking at time now. We need to be wrapping up here in a minute or two. see, screenshot, purpose of grading is to accurately reflect individual student achievement as related to course learning targets. So, and I think that's accurate. So, like putting it with the proficiency levels is great. Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Volunteer or victim? Okay. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining. I think we got some good thoughts, and we'll probably be able to continue a lot of this on Monday, 8 p.m., when we talk about a focus on proficiency. So, thank you for joining us, and hope to see you again soon. Adios.
Thanks.